Torah tells us that if a person lends money, regardless where in the world, a Jew to a Jew, and the sabbatical year comes and ends, and the borrower did not pay the debt, the end of the sabbatical year cancels the loan. The creditor has no right to collect that debt. If he didn't collateralize the loan, if he collateralized it, that means he already collected the debt. He just has to exchange the collateral for the debt. But it was uncollateralized, and you lent money and you did not collect the debt by the end of the sabbatical year, the Torah says the lender has no right to collect that money. But of course, when you lent the money to the person who borrowed, he was a credible borrower. For whatever reason, he wasn't able to pay. And if the end of the seventh year comes, the Torah says you have no right to collect that debt. The debt is canceled. So maybe you would say that would be a basis for discouragement to lend money. Every time you lend money, if ultimately you could collect is one thing. But if once the expiration time comes, at the end of the seventh year, he's not able to pay, the debt's canceled. So lending money, you're taking a risk. If it's not going to be a collateralized loan, you're taking a risk. Torah says, if you do not withhold your money from the person who truly needs the loan, you will merit multiple bracha for putting yourself in that position. Despite the fact there's a chance you may lose your money, Hashem will make it up to you with bracha. That's what the Torah tells us, explicit. This is not interpretation, this is explicit. What happens if he's truly in need and you don't lend him because of this, and he cries out that here he's in need and you didn't lend him? That could activate the attribute of justice against the person who's not willing to lend because he doesn't want to take a chance. There's a certain risk factor, he may not be able to collect. So we never want to be put in a position where somebody comes to us and is truly in need, and for whatever reason, which is not sufficiently justified, we turn him down. Because if that person goes and he cries out to Hashem that he's in need and the people are truly able to help him, that will activate the attribute of justice against the community. And it could be very not good. It can manifest itself in many bad things. Health, financial, everything under the sun, put the Jewish community in jeopardy. So it's interesting. Hillel Hazokin, Hillel the elder, was the prince of Israel. Because of this, he created a mechanism, it's called pruzmo. Because he understood that people are not so willing to lend because of this chance they may take a loss, he created this certain type of document which protects the uncollected loan, that even if the lender did not pay, the loan is protected and you're permitted to collect the debt even after the sabbatical year is over. Because again, it wasn't only to encourage people to lend money, but it's also to protect those who are not willing to lend from very serious prosecution, because they'll be prosecuted for not lending money. Here you have no reason not to lend. So all the reasons why you have no reason not to lend, those reasons don't exist any longer, because we write the pruzmo, the certain kind of document, okay? There's a story in the 1500s in the city of the Kabbalists, which was Tzvas, the Arizal. There was a certain community in the Middle East that all of a sudden there was a plague and Jews started to die. And it was a devout community and they couldn't understand what was the cause. Evidently, there was the attribute of justice came upon this community. And it was known that the Arizal, who was the great Kabbalist who lived in the city of Tzvas, he was able to give an immediate reading of where the problem lied. And they came to him. It was a community in Israel, but not in the proximity of Tzvas. And they asked him why. The Jews study, they're devout, they do everything. So why not? Why is God bringing this level of punishment on the community? He says, you know why? Because there's a widow who lives in this community, which nobody's paying attention to. She's destitute, and she has needs, and she's not able to support her family. And the community turned a blind eye on her. It's not deliberate, but people are occupied and busy with their own things. So because they turned a blind eye on this woman, and she is a widow, and a widow evokes the mercy of God, and God says, if you don't pay attention to the widow, I will bring, God forbid, tragedy upon the community. The moment you address her needs and make her confident financially, the plague will cease. And that's what happened. With one widow, do we know what, God forbid, could activate the attribute of mercy in a community? The people who are truly needy. There was a story many years ago. Person was a very special Jew, and nobody knew. And the wife ran a notion store. And the family fell on hard times. They're very proud. And suddenly, the husband was in his 50s, learned person, and he passed away suddenly. And it turned out, what did he die from? He died from a blood infection. And why did he not take medication to address this infection? Because he couldn't afford the insurance premium to pay for the doctor visit and the medication to address this problem. Nobody knew about it. Nobody knew. They kept it under wraps because they were a very proud family. They didn't want to come on to people. They're proud, but ultimately, the man's life was forfeited because he didn't realize how serious this infection was and didn't take the medication because he didn't know how serious it was. So for a few dollars, this man could have been alive. So how many people are out there who are not even aware of the financial predicament? But it is, and sometimes you have to look for it. You have to do your research. You have to make it known to these people, and they're proud people. And to give them and address their needs with the least degree of embarrassment. They should not be embarrassed whatsoever. Anonymously, they should be able to apply, and they should receive whatever they need, where the giver doesn't know who the recipient is, and the recipient doesn't know who the giver is. So there should not be any embarrassment. And nothing changes. King Solomon says, what was is, and what is will be. Things don't change. And the needs of the needy are always needy. And we have to leave no stone unturned to be able to locate these situations. I remember many years ago, we used to have a fundraiser to provide for Sukkot and Pesach in Israel. In America, we have no idea of what real poverty is. So we helped many families for Pesach, families who are needy, thousands of families. And afterwards, the children of the families wrote letters to those anonymous donors who helped the families. And the parent writes that the daughter at the Seder, children, they steal the afikoman. And the parents have to give a gift. So what was the afikoman present that this little girl asked for? A cup of yogurt. You hear this? She asked if her afikoman present should be a cup of yogurt. In the United States, you buy your son $1,000 hockey stick with a baseball glove. He says, Dad, that's all. And here these kids, they're denied a cup of yogurt. You understand how poor these people are? And what the child wants, a gift, a cup of yogurt. That just gives us, it's an eye-opener of what need is. We're not talking about luxuries. We're not talking about excess. We're talking about basic amenities that are needed to maintain a normal mental, emotional state. Because a child is so deprived. The child is raised with a level of deprivation. Maybe the child will not function normally as an adult. These are crucial years. So could you imagine if you alleviate the pain of such a person and you put the person on a even keel and bring some joy to that family. What does it mean? It means everything in the world. It means more than anything. Many years ago, when my son, Meir Simcha, my third son, studied in Israel, so the person who headed this project just passed away. He was originally from Chicago, passed away in his 80s. He went there as a student about 65 years ago to live in Israel as a student, was married there, married an American girl, raised a family, and he lived in a very special neighborhood in Jerusalem. It was called Ezra's Torah. There's a neighborhood in Yerushalayim called Ezra's Torah. And he would go, and there were many families in this neighborhood, which were very special families. People great, Talmidei Chachomim, devout Jews, and many of them had large families, and in those days it was inevitable. Many of the families had some children that weren't well, or other handicapped, whatever it was. And this person assumed responsibility that every week he would provide Shabbos food for their Shabbos table because they were poor. Vegetables, fish, wine, challah, whatever was needed, but at a very modest level. You provide. So my son was 20 years old at the time, and he was conscripted or recruited that these packages were delivered every Thursday night to these families. Maybe they would deliver these packages to about 60 families in this neighborhood. So when he had no money, so how did he put together these Shabbos packages, the fruits, the vegetables? So he would go to the market in Yerushalayim, and he would say to the vegetable and fruit vendors, at the end of the day, very often you take what the leftovers and you throw it out because it's bordering on turning rotten. I'll pare away the rotten leaves, take away those leaves, and I'll prepare packages for these poor people. They should have food for Shabbos. That fruits, vegetables. He needed only money to buy the challah for Shabbos. And he needed a small amount of money. So my son was one of the delivery boys. He would deliver the packages, knock on the door, leave the basket, go away. Person didn't know, there was no shame or anything. The person would find the basket of food every week. That was part of his Shabbos meal. They didn't have much more. So my son calls me up and says, my son calls me Ta. He says, I'm involved here in something. If this person is a tzaddik, if he would have just a little bit more money, he could really do this a lot easier and provide something much more substantial and significant for these families. So I said to him, ask this person who oversees the project, how much money does he need to really make a difference? This is to feed them for a year. Provide every Shabbos for a year for these 60, 70 families. So he says, $25,000, he could cover the whole year. 70 families that he doesn't have to pare down the vegetables and the fruits and put together this inferior quality basket. $25,000, he could work out a deal with the vegetable and fruit vendors, quality fruit, vegetables, and bread they could have every Erev Shabbos to leave the baskets. Okay? These are special families. So what do? When you see a good deal, you grab it. Right? That's what you do. So I saw this as a great deal. So I went to Ira Rennett. I said, Ira, the story goes back 35 years ago. I said, Ira, we're able in Israel to mine diamonds for pennies. Those are my words I said to him. We can mine diamonds for pennies. So he says, what is it about? So I told him. I said, these families are very special families, large families. They're really destitute. There are problems in the families, health problems, other issues. The $25,000 will come for the year. They'll feel they have value and worth. She wrote me a $25,000 check. And they were covered for the year. These people saw the sun rising. It was sun at high noon for these people for the next year. Okay. I shared the story with a certain person who also a student of mine. And he says to me, I want the mitzvah. He wants the mitzvah. How many people mine diamonds for pennies? Right? It's very unusual. So this person undertook it for 10 years. Every year for 10 years, he gave $25,000. Then afterwards, there were other issues. The person wanted to provide shoes for these families. They couldn't afford shoes for the families, for Yom Tov. So he needed another $10,000 for the year. So the person gave the 20, gave another 10. I'm just saying, in the scheme of things, it's a small amount of money, especially if you have the money. And even if you don't have the money, we could put it together. Each person gives a little bit. It all adds up, and we're able to address it. And many people have the opportunity to share in that special mitzvah, rather than take it all for yourself. You can't put it together, you have one person underwrite it. But if you could, as the Chavetz Chaim writes, better have multiple people joining in the mitzvah. Multiple people are beneficiaries of this opportunity. I'll give you an example. It's very interesting. Years ago, in the stock market, before insider trading, you had people, they owned seats on the American Stock Exchange, and everybody had an inside tip, if you remember. Everybody had an inside tip. Usually most of the inside tips were not good tips. People bought the stock and they lost their money. And the people who truly had the inside tips, they wouldn't share with anybody. They wanted it for themselves. Now the question is, why don't you share it with your friends? Why don't you share it with your family? People did not share it even with their families. Because when it comes to certain things, if I'm going to become wealthy and I'm going to succeed, it's me and not you. There's a certain something misfire in the emotion and mechanism of a person that, a stranger you'll help, your own family you're not going to help. That's the way it is. And they wouldn't share it. Wouldn't share it. Why not? But by sharing even one fraction of what you know, you can make a difference in your family's life or in a friend's life. Well, if I succeed, he succeeds. So what's the difference in me and him? I don't have the upper hand. I can't lord over him. He will not respect me as now because I have the money, he doesn't have the money. All this is the machinations of the evil inclination. But where's the humility? Where's the givingness? Where's the chesed? You're not permitted to abandon the flesh of your family. Turn it back on the person you're not permitted to turn it back on. But all this comes to haunt the person someday. There's a very interesting midrash in this week's parsha. When Yosef eventually revealed himself to his brothers, what happened? He says, Ani Yosef Oro Vichoi. I am Yosef, is my father still alive? It says, they were overwhelmed with shame and they could not speak. That's how dumbfounded they were. Why were they ashamed? They believed initially Yosef was out to discredit them, and ultimately he was out to have them destroyed. So based on that reading, they did what they thought was right. But however, now, in retrospect, they realized that all this was ego. The reason why they rejected Yosef and they acted with him so vehemently, even to sell him, to want to kill him, was that was all ego-driven. When a person comes to that level of realization, there's such a degree of shame that literally you're actually minimized to a level that you're not functionable. Because now the moment of truth has come, it's ego, it's nothing but ego. That's what it's about. And that's why they're dumbfounded. So the Midrash says, after 120 years, a day of reckoning before God, Even the most righteous person, God's going to present our record. And if he presents our record, the level of shame will be that we're not going to be able to open our mouths to God. And where do we see this from? So the Midrash says, Yosef was the youngest of the brothers. And look at the level of shame which came upon the brothers because the moment of truth came. And they couldn't respond, and they were ashamed that they couldn't speak. So when God will present the moment of truth to us, how much more will we be dumbfounded and ashamed of God for our behavior? We're talking about very religious people. You know what the truth is. Very often we make decisions in our lives. We believe they're right. And could be they are right. But you could have made a better decision. Why did you take the secondary position, not the first position? You know what the answer is? Because I have my ulterior motives. I have the whisperings in my ears. If I could give less, why give more? If I could do something more sternly, that he should appreciate who I am, why act to him humbly? Yeah, we have all these crazy things intermeshing with the quality of what we want to try to do. It's all called ego. But we believe we're God's gift to humanity. We did this mitzvah, we did that mitzvah, we learned, we this, we that. You even received a commendation from some organization. What kind of tzaddik you are. But when it comes to the day of reckoning in front of Hashem, and Hashem says, what about this, what about that? We're going to be dumbfounded. You could have done it better. Why did you do it better? Well, I thought it was good enough. Maybe few is good enough, but in terms of my standard, it's not good enough. So very often, we read in Pirkei Avos, Aseh lecha rav uknei lecha chaver. You should choose a teacher for yourself and have a friend. So Rabbeinu Yonah explains why a friend. Everybody has their conflicts of interest, but conflicts of interest are very limited to one's own subjectivity. Your friend does not have your conflicts of interest. So he can be more objective than you. So what's the value of having a good friend? You'll pass it before. What do you think? Like I have a question. I call up Larry. I said, Larry, what do you think? Right? He doesn't have the conflicts of interest that I have because he's a humble guy. So he can see more straight. Rabbi, it's ego. Give it no matter what. It's okay. You're not losing. You'll gain. So that's good advice he gives me. But that's the value of Aseh lecha chaver. Get yourself a good friend because your good friend will advise you what's good for you. Not what's good for him, because he doesn't have your conflicts. Every one of us has conflicts. Therefore, we always have to consult with somebody who will give us good advice. And that's the value of what it says in Pirkei Avos. Aseh lecha rav. We find the Chavetz Chaim, it's unbelievable. What was his means of income? Rad was a little village. And his wife opened a grocery store. And every day, the Chavetz Chaim would go and check the books to make sure that the profits matched the inventory, that she didn't overcharge people. He would check the scale to make sure honest weights and measures. Every day, the Chavetz Chaim would go at the end of the day to check it. And all of a sudden, he saw that the profit margin, they were doing business like they're going out of style. Everybody is patronizing them. And he realized, because people found out that it was his store, they wanted to patronize the Chavetz Chaim because he was a tzaddik. In the meantime, the competitor was being put out of business. You know what the Chavetz Chaim did? Well, lazy fare. That's what business is all about. You know what the Chavetz Chaim did? He shut down his store. There's no way I'm making money and putting out the other person out of business. But it's they have their own choice, not on somebody else's account. I'm not going to gain what somebody else is going to lose. Chavetz Chaim says, shut the store down. End of the story. How are we going to have livelihood? We have to do the right thing. Hashem will provide. He would not allow himself, even though everybody said it's justified. It's a big. You have to be a big boy when you play with in the big leagues, not at somebody else's expense. You pitch a ball at a child, 150 miles an hour fastball. You don't expect that kid to hit the ball. Well, he shouldn't be holding the bat. No, you shouldn't be throwing the pitch at that speed. But ultimately, we convince ourselves we're right. But when the day of reckoning comes, even as right as we were, Hashem will show us it's not the way you thought it was. Therefore, the level of embarrassment will be to such a point, we're going to be totally incapacitated from that level of shame.